chaos, but you are Lord of heaven and earth. And so while not all the world owns that and holds on to that truth, we do, and we entrust ourselves to you. We ask for your blessing upon the nations of the world in this chaotic time. Cool people's tempers, help people see clearly when things are distorted. Bless and be with our leaders who must make choices during this difficult time. May they proceed, it's so hard in a democracy, Lord, but may they proceed based on what is an internal sense of integrity and connection with you rather than what will make them popular with people. And Lord, we ask also for your blessing upon the Hoops family and Liz's daughter, and ask that you bless them in their struggle, whatever it is, see them through it and strengthen them. Bless us now as we come to your word for encouragement, for edification, and for teaching. Make our hearts teachable. We ask these things in Jesus' name. Amen. Okay. All right. So we are in chapter 18.
Yes.
Or are we waiting till Barb comes back to ask the questions about the documentary? How's that working?
I think she would like it.
Okay.
I know I said, gee, I have so many questions to ask the pastor, and she said, yeah, I won't be there to hear it, and so I think she wants to hear it.
Okay, then we will, I'm not sure she's joining us from Chicago. She's got grandbabies to pay attention to, so. So we'll wait till next week to tackle the topics that come out of that documentary. So, and we have, what, a half hour of it left or so?
Yes.
Okay, good. That's a good way to do it. We could watch the last half hour together and then lead right into the questions.
Okay.
So, all right.
18.
Okay. Had we read the first 8 verses, I believe? Or no?
I don't know.
Well, let's start over at 18 if no one remembers whether we read it or not.
Okay.
And is everybody warm in here?
I'm fine. I'm warm.
You're warm?
Yeah, but
I mean, I can go turn the air conditioner up a little. It's not set. We haven't set any of the thermostats yet. If you're warm, I can turn the air conditioner on a little bit.
Whatever. Makes
Okay,
everybody
I'll be right back.
I got this, so whatever you people want.
I'm good. Well, of course, I'm worried. It's a sweater, really. You never know what it.
No, never. And I only have it around me. If I get cold, I can put it on. I try to come prepared.
I think you've done a good job, Vanessa. I didn't see you on Sunday. I saw David, and I said, "Is Vanetta here?" And he said, "Yes." And I think were in the sanctuary. I started heading towards you, and then somebody stopped me. I can't remember who it was. And I began talking to them, and then I thought, oh my goodness, I better get out of here, church is finished. And then driving home, I said, John, I never did see Vanessa. I never even said good morning to her.
Good morning today for you.
Good morning for Sunday.
Sunday.
How long does it take you to get here?
It takes about 22, 23 minutes, something like that,
Okay.
depending on what traffic is like.
Where do you live?
In Bethlehem.
Oh.
But usually, if there's no problem with traffic and you're not behind too many slow-moving tractor trailers.
Yeah.
But there's a lot of tractor trailers. 512 is
gosh,
very
yes.
busy. Will you come up 512 or not?
Well, yeah, we come over 329 and then come up 512.
Yeah.
But 329 now has
Tractor
1,
trailers.
2, 3, 4, 5 warehouses on it, and we're starting to see more tractor trailers every day.
Oh, yeah.
I wasn't sure. There's not a thermostat in every room, and I'm not sure which rooms are connected, so I'm still learning my way around the new system. Okay. Chapter 18, verse 1. And the Lord appeared to him, that is Abraham, by the oaks of Mamre, as he sat at the door of his tent in the heat of the day. He lifted up his eyes and looked, and behold, 3 men were standing in front of him. When he saw them, he ran from the tent door to meet them and bowed himself to the earth and said, O Lord, if I have found favor in your sight, do not pass by your servant. Let a little water be brought, and wash your feet, and rest yourselves under the tree, while I bring a morsel of bread, that you may refresh yourselves. And after that you may pass on, since you have come to your servant. So they said, Do as you have said. And Abraham went quickly into the tent to Sarah and said, Quick, 3 seahs of fine flour, knead it and make cakes. And Abraham ran to the herd and took a calf that he had prepared and set it before them. And he stood by them under the tree while they ate. Okay. So, what grabbed your attention? I know we did cover this, but let's just a quick review. Anything especially that catches your eye this time that you want to ask a question about or draw to the group's attention? Can you hear me, Liz? Am I speaking loud enough?
Yes.
Okay.
May I ask who the 3 men are?
You may. We'll find out.
Who are the 3 men?
We will find out is the answer to that question. Clearly people that Abraham sees something in. It's unclear that they are dressed like regular strangers, but here you have a man who's recognized by a king of Egypt as a great lord in his own right. And what are his actions? He sees them and he runs to them. And that's an interesting phrase. When he saw them, he ran from the tent door to meet them and bowed himself to the earth. So he's treating them as people ranking above him in status. Now, as amazing as Middle Eastern hospitality is, and of course it is in part amazing because of this story. This story is absolutely central to the culture of the Middle East, even to this day. It's common, it's not uncommon to call Judaism, Christianity, and Islam the 3 Abrahamic faiths. Okay, so the stories of Abraham are absolutely central to the culture that all 3 faiths hold in common in the Middle East. Okay, and this is one of the, along with the calling of Abraham, this is one of the central stories. Okay, the sojourns to Egypt get a lot less play than the making of the covenant that we saw in chapter 15, and this story of Abraham being visited by the 3. In fact, you'll regularly find icons made of this. This is called the visitation, typically, and so you'll see this. This is a very, very important story.
You said the 3 religions were?
Judaism, Christianity, and Islam.
I never figured Islam for being greetings and all that. I thought it was more of a nasty religion that they
No, not especially not internally. It's not. But they have a responsibility. It's interesting. When I was living in Michigan, we were surrounded. It was much easier for me to get to the mosque than it was for me to get to the church where I worked. Much shorter walk. We were surrounded. The part of Michigan I was living in had the largest Lebanese population outside of Lebanon. Tremendous number. I think we had 5 or 6 mosques in town. There were quite a few. And Ann Arbor had more religious houses per capita than any other place in the United States, which was really interesting. Very, very diverse culture there. So I was in Staples one day making some photocopies, and I got invited to dinner at this Muslim man's house, and he clearly wanted to share with me the glories of being Muslim, because he knew I was there making copies for something for my church, and he knew I was a Christian. And that was the whole purpose of him inviting me to dinner, was to explain to me about Islam. So Islam is we can't say evangelical because that refers to the good news of Jesus, right? That's what that word refers to. But they are definitely a proselytizing faith, just like Christianity. And part of how they do that is to show great hospitality. But that's all. But it's both and. They can also be very vicious, especially in combat. There's a very complicated history that goes into Islam in that regard.
I mean, everything I read about Islam today is, I mean, I'm not talking about the people in this country. I'm talking about the country of, they're very cruel.
Well,
the one I remember, I just can't get out of my mind is the girl did something, she didn't wear her
Burqa.
burqa, and they accused her and found her guilty, and the penalty is death.
Yes.
And she was a virgin, and they couldn't kill her, so they had the jailer marry her, and then now she was not virgin anymore after that night, and
Then
then
they kill
they
her.
executed her. It's just a religion that it goes far beyond anything I could imagine.
Yes, it's very fascinating, in the sense that, what you're talking about in other countries, that is what they call Sharia law. So that is, one of the very big differences, between Christianity and Islam. Christianity has, if you want to call it, the separation of church and state baked in. It's there in the book of Romans. We are required to pray for our leaders, even though when St. Paul is writing that, he's awaiting, he's going to be soon awaiting death at Caesar's hand, he's still required to pray for him. And while we can have a Christian government, we're not required to have a Christian government. And the structure of that Christian government is not prescribed in the Bible. So if you have a Christian government, like Hungary does today, self-consciously, okay, that's one of the reasons why Hungary gets all kind of bad press right now, is they went from being communist to reclaiming their Christian heritage, so that there's actually an office of persecuted Christians there in Hungary. That's just like an office in the Department of Justice here. So very, very different, and they're widely hated within the European Union and progressive American politics. But their version of Christian government is a Christian democracy that makes lots of space for other religions. Medieval Europe would have had far less room for other religions, and you would have had not a democracy but a monarchy, right? And you would have had that really complex system that changed so many times. It's impossible to like kind of summarize it. The relationship between the church and the state at that time, whether the church was more in charge or whether the state was more in charge, and that was constant arm wrestling, right? Between the popes and the various people who proclaim themselves emperor. There was lots of that throughout history. So there's no prescription in Christianity for the way we need to relate to the government other than pray for our leaders. Those leaders could be Christian, they could be of another faith or no faith at all. All that's open to us. That's not true of Islam. With Islam, the correct form of government is prescribed within the Quran. And a major difference between the founder of Islam and the founder of Christianity is that the founder of Christianity died on a cross. Okay? The founder of Islam died as a conquering warlord. Conquered multiple cities. And we say conquered cities, we mean city-states, right? That's in the Greek form of like, there was no one government in the modern Saudi Arabia. This city and this city were effectively separate countries. So he conquered many countries. And that expansionism increased greatly even after his death. In the second generation and third generations of Islam, it spread massively all the way from what we think of as Pakistan today, right, in the east, to Spain in the west. So they expanded almost as quickly as the Mongol Empire had before them, or the Roman Empire before them. So really tremendously massive conquering thing. And so Sharia law is the world according to Islam. When Islam has a responsibility to do this. Now, not all Muslims try to do it. Don't misunderstand. One of my father-in-law's really good friends is a bigwig in the Republican Party here in Northeast Pennsylvania, and he has been since he fled the Shah back in the 70s. He's probably retired now from that kind of role, but so he had a robust view of separation of church and state and everything. I'm not talking about individual Muslims and where they fall out, but that would be what we would almost think of as a liberal form of Islam. More conservative forms of Islam want Sharia law. And it's called, remember the other phrase, Sharia is what you get inside the Dar al-Islam, which is literally not the world according to Islam, but the world of Islam. So in Islamic theology, in many ways, God doesn't even look at this part of the world. God won't look on our sin. God looks at the Muslim part of the world and sees it and approves of it. So the responsibility of every Muslim in the West is to make our countries into part of the Islamic world. Okay, if you're a conservative Muslim, so that's to make us part of the Dar al-Islam. So again, hospitality is a big thing, and a lot of status games are a big deal. We've talked about this in especially we were doing the Gospel of Luke and the Book of Acts, how important status was in the Roman Empire, and the closest thing we understand to that in the modern world in the West, I mean modern world in America, are going to be the mob movies. You've got this really strong status hierarchy within the mob. You know, first you're doing all this work to become a made man, then you're part of the family, right? Then you have very strict allegiance to the next person up the chain of command, and so on and so forth, up to the Godfather. And of course, the consigliere is the main function there. The vicar, or the right hand of the Godfather, gets his hands messy with all the stuff the Godfather once done. That's the equivalent of your right hand to the king in the ancient world, right? So we're not really familiar with that anymore, but that's functions within Islam very clearly. So all of this kind of hospitality stuff is how you both maintain and acquire status. You're sucking up to the people above you, and the people below you are sucking up to you. And you provide favors to them, so they owe you something. It's this cultural capital they exchange back and forth constantly. So Abraham runs out and abases himself at the feet of these three strangers. And we don't know who they are, but they clearly present themselves in such a way that it's unclear whether, if I was reading this with a modern Middle Eastern perspective, and a great book I recommend to everybody is called Seeing Jesus Through Middle Eastern Eyes. Wonderful book by a guy who lived over there for many, many years. A Western guy, so he can translate the Middle Eastern way of thinking to our way of thinking. A really good book. It's unclear at this point whether he is bowing down to them in a way where he's actually owning a lower status than them, or whether he's bowing down to them because he's trying to outdo them in social honor. He approaches the visitors. Before they present themselves to him, he approaches them and presents to him. I think it's the former. I think he's actually showing genuine honor to them as being of higher status, and here's why. There are very few times you see somebody run in the Bible in a social context.
Prodigal son.
Huh?
Prodigal son.
Exactly. That's what makes the prodigal son story so infamous. Why it would have been such an inversion of the expectations of the people who had originally heard the story of the prodigal son is that the father runs to the son. It literally says he lifts up his cloak to run. And so that would have been borderline offensive to the people who heard it, because that is not how a father treats a son. The son treats the father with respect, not the other way around. And the father is allowing his emotions to overcome, his joy at seeing his son to overcome the necessary status requirements socially for that moment. So it's a different way of thinking than we're used to. But that would have been what Jesus was playing with. And the fact that Abraham runs to them, and that the text is really clear about saying this. It doesn't say he presents himself and then bows. It says that he runs to them. That means this is almost like such an incredible joy that people of this level have come to someone as lowly as me, and presents himself there.
But the whole idea of hospitality in
Yes.
the Middle East, they live in the desert,
Mm-hmm.
and everybody, so you need a place, an oasis, you need a place where you can go and
Right.
somebody will help you.
Yes.
Yeah, and I would think you give help to someone thinking, well, when I'm out on my adventure or wherever I'm going.
Undoubtedly.
You know, somebody, I would think that would just be kind of ingrained in them, that
Yeah.
you would help others.
Yeah, that is undoubtedly true. That is fascinating. I'm looking at the feed to the internet, and oh, the camera froze. I don't know why. This camera keeps freezing. It's showing Sharia, but it's not showing Dar al-Islam. I don't know why. Oh well. This thing is goofy. Anyway, so yeah, I think that's absolutely true. That would be part of the social contract, what Thomas Hobbes would later call the social contract, right? I do for you, you do for me. That's also true of most agrarian cultures. Everybody, in a world that doesn't have insurance, everybody knows that they're one barn burning away from starving to death. Okay? So everybody cares for everybody else in a much more reciprocal way, which is why those status ties are so important. You're pulling at the fabric of the society and what lets us all survive. People who look at the ancient world and say, well, if I'd been there, I wouldn't have done those things. You're crazy. You absolutely would have. Unless you're the kind of person who violates all the current social taboos of our society, which would mean you go on to college campuses and start screaming about you hate gays. Because that's the culture on a college campus. It is in no way transgressive to be pro-gay on a college campus today, or pro-transgender. If you go on a college campus and you speak against that group, you will be sometimes expelled and always fined and put into remedial education for harassment. So, if they're not doing that, you don't have enough backbone to go and do what you think you would have done in the ancient world. The social fabric was so tightly woven as a support because they needed it to survive, that to violate that social fabric.
Right.
The prodigal son, that calling it that actually started during the Victorian era, because prodigal means wasteful. And so they were trying to waste not, want not. They were trying to instill the British youth with a good sense of purpose and this kind of thing. But both brothers get almost equal playtime. The brother who won't forgive his brother and is jealous that his father is forgiving. The hero of the story is the father, neither brother.
No.
Neither brother. So yeah. That's what makes it offensive, is that he runs to the son who should approach him on his hands and knees and ask forgiveness. The father doesn't even wait and goes and runs, and that's our image of God. So I agree with you. I think that the running piece here does that prodigal son story was exactly the one that this put me in mind of. And it's rare enough that this happens that Jesus was probably deliberately drawing on us, because this story is, again, one of the 4 or 5 most central stories of the Old Testament to the Jewish mind. So, and should be to ours by extension. What else?
I guess what he says.
Okay.
I have found favor in your eyes. Making himself lower, like you said, yes.
Mm-hmm. It would be my honor to serve you.
Yes.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Well, I was just struck. I mean, I'm not the greatest cook in the world. If I had unexpected company and, okay, make ready, quick, go do this. I mean, I was, oh my God, no.
Uh-huh.
Do I have the recipe? What the heck am I going to do?
I keep thinking about if I invited someone over to our house for dinner tonight and called my wife and said, we'll be there in 20 minutes.
Yeah.
Yeah, right.
She would not be happy.
Not happy, no. Yeah, that's what struck me was, but,
Yep.
and, you know, to cook the calf that
Mm-hmm.
quickly.
Yep. Well, and if you look at C, it says 3 seahs. A seah is about 7 quarts of flour.
Oh,
So this is 21 quarts of flour. So, and fine flour. So this would not be what you ate day to day.
Yeah.
You know, I was a huge Mark Twain fan, especially Huckleberry Finn, and if you remember the story that he fakes his own death in order to escape from the town because he thinks his father's coming after him, and so what he does is back in that day, if they thought somebody drowned in the river, which is how he faked his death, they would put a little bit of mercury inside a piece of bread and float it down the river. And the superstition was that the bread would float to where the body was and stay there. So he's hiding in an island, watching them firing off the cannons from the steamboat because the percussion of the cannon is supposed to loosen the body if it got tangled and let it rise up. And he's catching the loaves of bread as they send them down the river, and he says, oh, this was good white bread, not the corn pone that we usually got to eat, you know. But that's what he did. He's basically, and this again is why I think that this story was Jesus' drawing point for the prodigal son, is you kill the fattened calf, right? And so that's what you see here. He goes and kills a fresh calf, the best of his herd, to feed these people. 7 quarts of flour is going to be enough bread to feed his entire camp. So they're setting a feast for these 3.
Is there any significance in the last line where it says he stood by them? In mine it says he stood
Yes.
by them
Yes.
under the tree while they ate. He does not partake
He does
with
not.
them.
He's taking the servant's role. The servant stands at attention, ready to serve. The person who's eating has the position of honor, and yes. So he's definitely, even more than inviting someone farther up the status chain, he's treating himself as a servant in that situation.
I'm curious to know who the 3 people are.
We are going to find out as we go here. Yes. Okay. Anything else about these opening 8 verses? Okay, verse 9. They said to him, "Where is Sarah, your wife?" And he said, "She is in the tent." The Lord said, "I will surely return to you about this time next year, and Sarah, your wife, shall have a son." And Sarah was listening at the tent door behind him. Now Abraham and Sarah were old, advanced in years. The way of women had ceased to be with Sarah. So Sarah laughed to herself, saying, "After I am worn out and my Lord is old, shall I have pleasure?" The Lord said to Abraham, "Why did Sarah laugh and say, 'Shall I indeed bear a child now that I am old?' Is anything too hard for the Lord?" At the appointed time, I will return to you about this time next year, and Sarah shall have a son. But Sarah denied it, saying, "I did not laugh," for she was afraid. He said, "No, but you did laugh." Okay. So what grabs your attention with these verses?
It seems, that she lied.
Yes.
Nerves
She
to
did.
lie.
Yeah, she did. She definitely did. Mm-hmm. Probably out of good social graces, but she still did. Do you have the answer to your question now?
Your text is different than mine.
Okay. Where specifically? Yeah, because you have an NIV, I think.
Read 10.
Verse 10? Sure. The Lord said, "I will surely
There,
return to
that
you."
was it right there.
Yeah.
The Lord said.
Mine
Doesn't say that.
What does yours say?
It
He.
says,
Simply says he.
then one of them said.
Mine just says he said.
Mine says the Lord said.
You have the same Bible as he does.
Well, let me pull up
Well,
some
I don't know.
comparisons
I
here.
do,
Okay. Why are we going to Romans? My Bible software is acting goofy today. What version do you have? I thought you had the NIV. I'm looking at the NIV. And it says the Lord.
New International Version.
Yeah, my version of that. You must have a revised version of that, because the New International Version I have says the Lord.
And is Lord all caps?
Yahweh.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
So you've answered one of your questions.
Mm-hmm. I'm just going to pull this down here, and unfortunately my RSV is my most trusted translation, but my RSV in my electronic version is what they call interpolated. So it has all the Hebrew directly below it, but it makes every line like this wide. So I get like 2 lines per page, and I'm scrolling and scrolling and scrolling, trying to find out what I need here.
I think it jumped out at me. Was that
Mm-hmm.
I just kind of, she's kinda bold, I mean, she said, at my age, I would have pleasure, I mean,
Mhm.
that's kind of.
It's more, it is a more direct way of speaking than we are used to
Yes.
in our world.
Right.
Yes.
But not having a child was negative.
Very.
So
Yeah,
this-
it
this
was
would-
definitely,
This would raise her in status.
there would have been rumors about Sarah in the camp.
Right.
And a lot of, oh, she can't even have a kid. You know, that,
Say that again?
that the inability of a woman to have a child was generally considered a curse. So she would have been, they would have been wondering what her secret sin was because
Oh, I
she
see.
couldn't have a child.
I did, see.
Yeah, so the pleasure piece here seems to refer more to having a child than it
Child
does
than,
to
yeah,
sexual
sure.
congress.
Right, right,
Yeah. Yeah. I'm gonna pull up my Young's literal translation and see what that tells me. I am not a great scholar of Hebrew yet. No, I think it's he. I think it's actually he. I think the Lord is actually an interpolation there. I am not seeing that in the Hebrew. Yep. Just and, in fact. There's not even, it's a verb. And so it's the way, again, in certain languages, a verb can imply a noun without the noun actually being specified. You don't even need a pronoun to substitute because you conjugate the verb. And so in this case, it's just the verb said.
Well, if he's telling her you're gonna have a child, it's gotta be the Lord.
Well, that's certainly the implication. It will get much clearer by verse, let's see where we're at in verse 14.
Mhm.
What they might be doing is implying it based on verse 14.
Okay.
Like I said, sorry, this version of it's really bad for me to read. Now that is Yahweh. That is Yahweh at verse 14.
Oh,
So what they're probably doing is reading backward from verse 14 to say the he, so that when it just says, and he said she is in the tent, you don't think it's Abraham again.
Yeah.
Is probably what they're doing there. They're making it clear for the reader, not strictly literal to the original language. But it is Lord in verse 14.
Mine is Lord, all caps in 13 too.
Yes,
Yes.
sorry, and I can check, I saw 14 and didn't check that.
Okay.
Let me check 13 for you.
Yeah, mine is in 13.
Okay. Yeah, it's also Yahweh in 13. Yep.
Okay.
Yeah, you're good. So I think that's what they're doing. I think they're allowing us to see that reality, and just be able to keep up with the way the story is progressing. So we know that somebody's responding to Abraham, and Abraham's not continuing to talk.